Ukraine's military has received a shipment of cluster munitions from the United States, which it plans to use to boost its counter-offensive efforts against the Russian invasion. This was confirmed by General Oleksandr Tarnavsky, the head of Ukraine's Southern Command, who said that Ukraine is yet to use the weapons, but their presence could radically change the battlefield dynamics. He stressed that the munitions would not be deployed in densely populated areas. On the other hand, Russia has continued its drone and missile strikes on Ukrainian regions, including Kyiv, for the third consecutive day. Despite these attacks, Ukraine's air defense system successfully shot down all 20 drones that targeted different areas of the country, with debris falling on 4 districts of Kyiv. Ukrainian troops remain engaged in combat actions around Bakhmut, in the eastern region of Donetsk. These developments are occurring in parallel to the recent NATO summit, where Ukraine's situation has been a prominent topic. This shows a persistent resilience and resistance from the Ukrainian forces against the ongoing Russian invasion. The support from international entities like the US and NATO indicates a continued international commitment to Ukrainian sovereignty. Major General Ivan Popov, Commander-in-Chief of Russia's 58th Combined Arms Army stationed in southern Ukraine, has reportedly been dismissed from his post by Moscow's military leadership. This move comes in response to Popov's critique of Russian battlefield strategy and his expressed concern over troops fighting without rest. In a voice message circulated on Telegram, Popov highlighted the tragedy of modern war, emphasizing the lack of artillery reconnaissance and counterstrikes, as well as the numerous deaths and injuries caused by enemy artillery. He lamented the ineffectiveness of Russia's targeting of Ukraine's heavy weaponry, leading to mass death and injury. Earlier reports from other Telegram channels indicated that Russia's Chief of General Staff, Valery Gerasimov, had labeled Popov an alarmist before replacing him. Popov was apparently moved to forward positions in Ukraine after threatening to voice his complaints to Russian President Vladimir Putin. Popov's dismissal and public critique of the Russian military strategy mirror the discontent earlier expressed by Yevgeny Prigozhin, who has been criticizing Moscow's top commanders for their poor military planning for months. This incident reflects internal discord within the Russian military ranks and could potentially influence the morale of troops and the overall progress of the invasion. The lack of effective leadership and planning, coupled with dissent among commanders, could undermine the Russian military's operational efficiency. In the past day, about 20 combat engagements have taken place in various locations throughout Ukraine, including Kupiansk, Lyman, Bakhmut, Avdiivka, and Marinka. These clashes have involved missile and air attacks from Russian forces, who have been focusing their efforts on these key locations. In the Lyman direction, Russian invaders attempted to conduct offensive actions to the east of Nevsky, in the Luhansk region, and Terny in the Donetsk region, but their efforts were unsuccessful. Similarly, in the Bakhmut direction, Ukrainian defenders managed to repel all enemy attacks near Berkivka, despite enduring extensive air and artillery strikes. In Marinka, Ukrainian forces continue to resist Russian onslaught. Despite numerous offensive attempts by Russian troops near Novomykhailivka in the Shakhtarska direction, their efforts have not resulted in any major advances. Conversely, in the Melitopol and Berdyansk directions, Ukraine's defense forces have been advancing, securing their positions within recaptured areas, and conducting counter-battery measures to neutralize enemy artillery. Despite the sustained Russian efforts, the situation in the Volyn and Politia directions has reportedly remained relatively stable, with no significant changes. However, there have been activities from Belarusian units near the border with Ukraine, potentially indicating preparatory actions for further military movements. These continued clashes indicate that the conflict is far from a resolution, with both sides maintaining their positions and engaging in regular combat. The dismissal of Russian Army Major General Ivan Popov has stirred controversy and could potentially incite further dissent within the Russian military, according to Igor Girkin, also known as Strelkov, a former leader of the Russia-backed separatist forces in Donetsk. Popov had been openly critical of the Russian General Staff, voicing his concerns about the significant problems the Russian forces were facing in Ukraine. After his dismissal, Popov, who has adopted the alias Spartacus and refers to his supporters as gladiators, recorded a message for the Russian military in which he accused the general staff of being indifferent to the issues he had raised. This public display of discontent is seen as a risky move that could potentially lead to instability within the ranks. Gherkin sees Popov's public appeal as a potentially dangerous precedent, akin to inciting a mutiny. He points out that unlike the previously reported rebellion led by mercenary leader Yevgeny Prigozhin, Popov, as a high-ranking military official, could garner significant support from the military, which might have more serious consequences for the Russian government. According to Gherkin, if such open dissent continues, it could lead to an uncontrolled disintegration of the Russian military, posing a severe threat to the Kremlin's hold on its armed forces. This situation indicates a growing tension within the Russian military structure amid the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. The aftermath of the June 24th mutiny by the Wagner Group, a Russian paramilitary organization, continues to send ripples through the Russian military hierarchy. As reported by the Wall Street Journal on July 13th, Russian security forces have detained 13 high-ranking military officers for questioning in relation to the mutiny. This report reaffirms that General Sergei Surovikin, the commander of the Russian Air Force, remains in custody. It's also reported that at least 13 senior officers were taken in for questioning, although some have since been released. The sources suggest that approximately 15 officials have either been suspended or dismissed from service in the aftermath of the mutiny. Surovikin is reportedly being held in Moscow and has faced repeated interrogations concerning his knowledge of and involvement in the Wagner Group's mutiny. The allegations suggest that the general was aware of the group's plans, but did not take part. Surovikin's deputy and the deputy chief of military intelligence are also reported to be among the detained and suspended personnel. Moreover, the report suggests that some of the high-ranking officers under investigation may have been directly employed by the Wagner Group. This series of actions indicates a significant upheaval within the Russian military, pointing to possible divisions and fractures within its command structure. U.S. President Joe Biden has made a significant statement regarding Ukraine's future relationship with the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO. His remarks came after the NATO alliance had previously declined to provide a clear timeline for when Ukraine might be invited to join. In his statement, President Biden indicated that Ukraine would become a member of NATO, but highlighted that no country could join the alliance while a war was ongoing, because that would automatically involve the alliance in the conflict. He clarified that it wasn't a question of whether Ukraine should or should not join, but rather when they would be able to join, and that they would indeed become part of NATO in the future. President Biden further noted that he saw no chance for Russian President Vladimir Putin to secure a victory in the ongoing war in Ukraine. He outlined 2 reasons for his perspective. First, he doubted that Russia could sustain the war indefinitely, due to resource and capacity constraints. Second, he proposed that at some point, Putin might decide that continuing the war was not in Russia's best interests, whether economically, politically, or otherwise. President Biden's statements affirm the U.S.'s support for Ukraine in the face of Russian aggression and its commitment to Ukraine's future inclusion in NATO, subject to the resolution of the current conflict. On July 12th, significant moves were made to bolster Ukraine's security amidst ongoing conflict with Russia. The Group of Seven G7, Coalition and NATO offered long-term security commitments to Ukraine during the NATO summit in Vilnius. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg announced a 3-part package, which includes a multi-year program of practical assistance, the creation of a NATO-Ukrainian Coordination Council, and a commitment to allow Ukraine to join the alliance without going through a Membership Action Plan, MAP, a standard process for countries aspiring to join NATO. Despite these positive developments for Ukraine, Russian sources claimed that the summit was a failure for Ukraine because it did not secure immediate NATO membership. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov stated that the G7's provision of security guarantees to Ukraine was potentially very dangerous and a threat to Russian security interests. In other news, the Russian Ministry of Defense announced that the Wagner Group, a private military company, has almost completely transferred weapons and military equipment over to the Ministry of Defense. This follows the Kremlin's acknowledgement of a meeting between Russian President Vladimir Putin and Wagner Group financier Yevgeny Prigozhin on June 29th. This is likely part of the Kremlin's wider narrative effort to portray itself as fully in control following the Wagner Group's mutiny. Meanwhile, former Russian officer Igor Girkin, Strelkov, claimed that certain members of Putin's inner circle may push Putin to end the war in Ukraine as a strategic move to depose him. This suggests some internal discord within the Russian leadership regarding the ongoing conflict. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov stated on July 13, 2023, that Russia would consider the transfer of F-16 fighter jets to Ukraine by Western nations as a nuclear threat. Lavrov's remarks are based on the fact that F-16s are capable of carrying nuclear weapons, though the U.S. has not approved any country to provide Ukraine with these fighter jets at this time. Lavrov warned that, amidst ongoing combat operations, Russian servicemen will not differentiate between F-16s equipped to deliver nuclear weapons and those that are not. As a result, any F-16 within the Ukrainian armed forces would be considered a nuclear threat from the West. These comments demonstrate the high tensions and grave concerns Russia has about potential military support to Ukraine from Western nations, especially the U.S. It is worth noting, however, that Lavrov's remarks may also be aimed at dissuading Western countries from providing such support to Ukraine. The recent investigation by RTVI, a Russian media outlet, indicates that companies associated with Yevgeny Prigozhin, chief of the Wagner Private Military Company, PMC, continue to receive lucrative contracts despite the turmoil surrounding the Wagner Group's uprising. These contracts, awarded post-revolt, are primarily for catering services within hospitals and schools. The 9 contracts together are worth over 1 billion rubles, or approximately $11 million. This financial activity suggests Prigozhin's business activities and influence have not been significantly impacted by the recent instability. The investigation also reveals the scale of Prigozhin's business empire. Following the Wagner Group's revolt, security forces found seals for 600 different legal entities at one of Prigozhin's offices, suggesting his involvement in the operation of hundreds of companies. However, the official record shows a smaller number. According to counterparty verification services, Prigozhin, as an individual entrepreneur, has held leadership positions in at least 10 companies and has founded 27 others at various times. This discrepancy indicates that his business interests might be broader and more intricate than what is officially recognized.